The affordable collector collects for meaning, not value. And the best value are projects that tell a story. For this project, I wanted to tell the story of baseball through the various seasons of baseball. And so, for each season, I researched the MVPs and the Cy Young Award votes for each year from 1977 to the present, and made a list of all of the best players for each season and put them together in a binder. And I'll show you how I did that. All right, one of my favorite debates every year is who's going to win the MVP, and I love collecting those cards. Here we have the MVPs from 1986 from the American League and the National League, Roger Clemens and Mike Schmidt. How do we know these are the MVP cards? Well, because Topps has stated that these are the MVP cards. So Topps in its 1975 set, this is a heritage set, claimed that the cards from the year they won the MVP should be the cards that go with the MVP. But a flaw with that thinking is, why did Roger Clemens win the MVP? Let's take a look at the back. I don't know, because you don't have his 1986 statistics. Boom. And here is 1987, Roger Clemens to the rescue. Why did he win the MVP and Cy Young? Great season? Well, maybe because he went 24-4 with a 2.48 ERA. The best part of the baseball card are the stats on the back. These have his stats from his MVP season. Same thing with Mike Schmidt. Why did Mike Schmidt win MVP? Well, take a look at the back of the baseball card. Maybe it was because he had 37 home runs with 119 RBIs while hitting .290. Good enough for MVP. My contention is these are the MVP cards, not Topps propaganda saying these should be the MVP cards. These are the MVP cards. Here we see the 1977 card set. Let me show you how I organize each page. So first off, I start off with the MVPs of the league, followed by Cy Youngs and the other significant players of the year. So let's take a look at some of these one by one. Thurman Munson was the American League MVP in 1976, but again commemorated here with his 1977 card. He was the captain of the Yankees and well-deserving. Joe Morgan was the National League MVP. He led the league in WAR and OPS, so another deserving winner. The Reds took the World Series that year. Next, the American League Cy Young Award winner was Jim Palmer. He led the league in WAR and WHIP, in wins and WHIP, so a deserving candidate. Randy Jones won the National League Cy Young Award and also led in wins and WHIP. That card is very 1970s. Speaking of 1970s, Mark Fidrych was the quirky Rookie of the Year that year. In the talk of baseball, he was also second in Cy Young and led the American League in WAR and ERA. So using modern stats, we may even say he should have been Cy Young. But in this era, the wins leader usually took the award, so Jim Palmer gets the advantage. So I still have space for 4 more players. The National League Rookie of the Year was insignificant, so I include George Brett, who was second in MVP voting in the American League batting champ. George Foster was second in MVP voting in the National League and received 5 first-place votes. Mike Schmidt was third in MVP and the National League Home Run King. Meanwhile, Johnny Bench won the World Series MVP and was a significant player for the Big Red Machine. So that's how I organize each page, and I have that for 1976 to the present. Eventually, I would like to go back as far as I can. In this video, we will look at the seasons through 1986. All right. In 1977, Rod Carew was a deserving MVP, which you can tell by looking at the back of his card, especially since the front looks like he is having a stroke. First off, his batting average of .388 is the fourth highest of the post-war era and the highest with 500 or more at-bats. His 239 hits were the most since 1930. I know some of those counting stats are out of favor today, but even using modern statistical analysis, he also led the league in WAR and OPS. So a great year for the MVP, Rod Carew. George Foster was the National League MVP with 50 home runs. And that was in an era in which 50 home runs was a big deal. He was the only one to do it between 1965 to 1990, which was a 25-year span. The American League Cy Young Award was close that year, with Sparky Lyle winning in a close race. In this era, relievers were overvalued, and while he was a good one, Jim Palmer and Nolan Ryan also received significant support. Here you can see how the voting works, with the writers ranking the players, and first place votes worth so much, second place votes worth so much, etc. Each city's writers got one vote. Using modern analysis, Ryan had the highest WAR of the group, and so today he may have won it, which is notable considering he never won Cy Young, and so was he robbed this year? Reggie Jackson, meanwhile, became Mr. October and was World Series MVP, so I include his card. In 1978, the MVPs were Jim Rice and Dave Parker, and this brings us to one of the great debates in MVP voting, that between pitchers and hitters. So pitchers are eligible to win MVP, and several have, of course, but some say since they already have the Cy Young Award and only play every 5 games or so, they should not be considered for MVP. In 1978, though, consider the case of Ron Guidry, the ace of the Yankees, and Jim Rice. Now, Guidry did win the Cy Young Award, but he probably should have won MVP as well. He had a 9.6 WAR to Jim Rice's 7.6. He was 25-3 with a 1.74 ERA and under 1 WHIP, and really held the Yankees together that year on their way to another World Series victory. Meanwhile, Jim Rice, he had a great season. He led the league in home runs and RBIs and had the most total bases since 1940, so definitely notable. But he spent time at DH and played in a notable hitter's park at Fenway. At any rate, Guidry was the unanimous Cy Young and second MVP with 8 first-place votes, and so that debate will continue. Gaylord Perry won his second Cy Young and led the National League in wins. Lou Whitaker was Rookie of the Year. Steve Garvey led the NL in hits and was second in NL voting. George Foster, again, had a big season, leading the league in home runs and RBIs. And Bucky Dent, of course, broke every Red Sox heart, winning World Series MVP. All right, but beating the Red Sox in a 1-game playoff. In 1979, Don Baylor, graduate of Austin High School, won the American League MVP. But this was a weird year in the NL, with 8 players receiving first place votes, including Keith Hernandez and Dave Winfield. You also have the only tie in World Series history, with Keith Hernandez and Willie Stargell tying for MVP. Stargell was the emotional and much-loved leader of the We Are Family World Series winning Pirates, but he only had a 2.5 WAR and led the league in no categories, while Keith Hernandez had a 7.6 WAR and led the league in hitting at .344 and runs scored. Meanwhile, the third place finisher, Dave Winfield, probably should have won it. He led the league in WAR while hitting 34 home runs and a league-leading 118 RBIs, so we might have given it to him in our era. Mike Flanagan led the AL in wins with 23 and took home the American League Cy Young. The NL Cy Young race was close.
with Joe Negro losing the Cy Young to a closer by one first place vote. Closers were overvalued in this era. And Bruce Sutter led the NL in saves. Meanwhile, George Brett finished third in MVP voting while leading the league in hits and WAR. So today we may consider the third place finishers in each league, Winfield and Brett, the MVPs, at least based on WAR, if that is your thing. Willie Stargell was the World Series MVP in 1979. All right. 1980 had no controversy, at least in the MVP race. George Brett took home the AL MVP, leading in WAR and hitting .390, which was the highest batting average since Ted Williams in 1941. Tony Gwynn hit .394 in a strike-shortened season. Some people don't count that and say Brett had the highest batting average. Meanwhile, Mike Schmidt led the Phillies to the World Series and was unanimous NL MVP and World Series MVP. He was starting to establish himself as the greatest third baseman, of all time. The AL Cy Young Award was a close race between Steve Stone and Mike Norris. Stone had 25 wins to Mike Norris's 22, and wins usually won out in this era, even though today we understand they're more a product of the team's success. Both received the same amount of first place votes, but using modern analytics, Mike Norris was clearly the better pitcher and was probably robbed of the Cy Young Award. Willie Wilson led the league in WAR, runs and hits, and finished fourth in MVP, so the Moneyball types would have loved him. 1981 was one of two strike-shortened seasons in this era, and only 109 games were played. You also have some ugly cards, and a relief pitcher winning the MVP and Cy Young. Raleigh Fingers here took home both awards in the American League. I always disagree with those selections. Now, he was great with a 1.04 ERA and .872 WHIP, but I just don't think a relief pitcher should win MVP, though it would happen two more times. Rickey Henderson, meanwhile, was second in MVP with a bunch of stolen bases and the hits leader, while Dwight Evans was third and led the league in WAR, OPS, and home runs. So I would have given it to either Dwight Evans or Rickey Henderson. Meanwhile, Mike Schmidt won his second straight MVP as the WAR, home run, RBI, and OPS leader. Fernando Mania took over the National League that summer as Valenzuela became the only player to win Rookie of the Year and the Cy Young Award in the same year. Tom Seaver was a close second in Cy Young. So that is 1981. In 1982, Robin Yount was the unanimous AL MVP, posting a 10 WAR. Dale Murphy won the first of two straight NL MVPs and was the RBI leader. Pete Yukovich was the American League Cy Young Award winner, and although I loved him in Major League as Clu Haywood, Bill James says Yukovich might be the worst Cy Young selection of all time, and that 1.502 whip suggests as much. Dave Stieb, Rick Sutcliffe, or even Dan Quisenberry would all have been better options. All had a higher WAR, a lower ERA, a higher ERA plus, and struck out more batters than Vukovich. So a mystery as to why he won it. Maybe people have better memories of that year can tell me why Vukovich deserved the Cy Young that year. Steve Carlton led the NL in wins, which was good enough for his fourth Cy Young Award. Hall of Famer Cal Ripken won the Rookie of the Year award. Lonnie Smith received significant support for MVP with 8 first-place votes, finishing second. Al Oliver was third in MVP, leading the league in batting, hits, and RBIs. And Rickey Henderson set the modern single-season stolen base record with 130. In 1983, Cal Ripken and Eddie Murray led the Orioles to a World Series victory. and finished 1-2 in a close MVP vote. Dale Murphy posted a 30-30 season, which was a big deal back then, and led the league in RBIs, pulling down his second straight MVP. Lamar Hoyt and John Denny led their respective leagues in wins, giving them the Cy Youngs. The reliever Dan Quisenberry was a close second in the AL. He led the league in saves with a whip under 1 and received 9 first place votes. Mike Schmidt led the National League in home runs and was 3rd in MVP voting. In 1984, the Tigers got off to a super hot start. We're the story of baseball, and so we have another case of a reliever winning MVP and Cy Young in the form of Willie Hernandez. His 4.8 WAR was underwhelming, but in a down year for offense, no one else was really dominant, so hard to argue for someone else. Another reliever, Dan Quisenberry, was also highly regarded this year. He finished 2nd in Cy Young and 3rd in MVP, receiving significant first place votes in each category. In the National League, Ryan Sandberg was the runaway MVP, leading the Cubs to the playoffs and posting an 8.5 WAR, well-deserving. You had 2 great Rookie of the Year performances with Alvin Davis in the American League and Dwight Gooden with one of the most impressive rookie campaigns in history. Kent Hrbek was 2nd in AL MVP, and Alan Trammell was the World Series MVP. Rick Sutcliffe was also there with the Cubs, winning NL Cy Young. In 1985, we have another controversy here. Even though I love Don Mattingly, this was a case of voters loving the RBI guy in this era. That stat was overvalued. Don Mattingly would take home the AL MVP, but George Brett had a better batting average than Don Mattingly and led the league in OPS while leading the Royals to the playoffs. Meanwhile, Rickey Henderson also has a good argument. He finished 3rd in MVP, but he led the league in WAR, 9.9 to Mattingly's 6.5, and scored the most runs since 1940. By the way, Wade Boggs led the league in hitting at 368. Brett Saberhagen was dominant on the mound, winning the American League Cy Young and World Series MVP while leading the league in WAR and WHIP. Dwight Gooden had one of the great pitching seasons in history and was a unanimous NL Cy Young with 24 wins, a 1.53 ERA, and a 12.2 WAR. So wow in every way. The NL MVP race was close with Willie McGee winning, but Dave Parker and Pedro Guerrero close behind. All right, so that is 1985, represented by 1986 tops. Our final year for this video is the 1986 race. And in 1986, we have another hitter versus pitcher debate with Roger Clemens winning MVP and Cy Young. Roger Clemens was great that year. He had an 8.8 WAR and a whip under 1. Great season. But Don Mattingly, who finished 2nd MVP, was also great, hitting .352 with 31 home runs and 238 hits. So a classic hitter versus pitcher debate. Of course, the Red Sox would make the playoffs. The Yankees did not, so that may have influenced voters too. Jim Rice, meanwhile, was 3rd in AL MVP, so voters were really favoring the Red Sox that year. Mike Schmidt won his 3rd MVP, leading the league in home runs and RBIs. Glenn Davis was a close 2nd, though I'm not sure why. Schmidt was better in every offensive category, leading him by 2 wins in WAR and 100 points in OPS. The Astros did make the playoffs, so maybe writers were favoring him. Mike Scott was also really good in these years. He led the NL in strikeouts with 306 and a 2.22 ERA, winning the NL Cy Young. Fernando Valenzuela, though, was a close 2nd, and this was a case of voters favoring wins above all else. Valenzuela led in wins, but Mike Scott dominated in everything else. Meanwhile, Jose Canseco is an exciting slugger for a rookie, and the Topps All-Star Rookie Trophy returns. I will continue in another video picking up with 1987 MVP and Cy Youngs. Check out that one to come.